Hi everyone, Dr. Kelli-an Lawrence here, welcoming you to stage 4 of the health communication process. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about logic models. A logic model is a very important tool for planning and implementing health communication campaigns. So it may feel confusing to be talking about logic models here under evaluation instead of earlier in the course when we were looking at planning and implementing campaigns. And that's exactly why I want to offer a mini lecture about logic models. I want to make sure that everyone understands that logic models are tools for planning a program or campaign, but also a vital resource to return to when preparing to evaluate a program or campaign. A program logic model is a visual representation showing what resources can be put into the campaign or initiative, what and how many messages, materials, and activities can be implemented, what short-term and long-term outcomes can be expected as a result of the campaign or initiative. It's literally a picture or a chart. I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute. But first, let me explain that logic models are based on the understanding that health campaigns or initiatives like Cope Care Connect have broad goals. Goals can be defined as what will be achieved with whom. For example, if we look at Cope Care Connect, the goal would be Cope Care Connect will increase students' coping skills and feelings of connection. Logic models are also based on the understanding that campaigns or initiatives have SMART objectives. Objectives, also known as expected outcomes, always indicate how much of what will be achieved with whom and by when. So as an example of an objective, we can look at Cope Care Connect again. There, an objective or expected outcome might be, by the end of the social marketing campaign, students will report greater confidence in their ability to cope with everyday stressors. Notice that the objective indicates how much, greater, of what, confidence, with whom, students, and by when, by the end of the campaign. Objectives are written very precisely. Objectives are SMART. They're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-limited. Objectives do not say how those outcomes will be achieved. Notice that there's no indication of what activities will be used to increase students' confidence, just that it will be greater at the end of the campaign. And now, I know that this omission feels wrong to some people, but remember, a logic model doesn't just show outcomes the campaign or initiative is expected to achieve. It also shows what resources will be put into it and what messages, materials, and activities can be implemented. So the logic model does lay out the activities that will be used to achieve the outcomes. Let's walk through a couple of examples to see how this works. Here's a very standard depiction of a logic model. It shows inputs, what resources go into a program. For example, the money you spend, the staff time and capital you direct into the campaign, the equipment you use, and so on. It also shows the activities. Remember, these are the messages, the materials, the activities, the events that will be implemented as part of the campaign. You can see from the example, activities in logic model can mean events such as workshops, displays, contests, rallies, petitions, but they could also be materials such as videos, posters, cards, signboards, and novelty items. A logic model typically shows outputs, that is, what is produced or how many things are distributed, how many people are reached. So examples of outputs might be the type of assets that were produced. Did you produce a video, a poster, a website, a workshop, a display table, and so on? Outputs also include how many of these assets were developed. Did you produce one poster or three? And how many were distributed, as in how many posters were displayed, how many people saw the video, how many people registered for a workshop or joined a contest or heard an announcement. These are all examples of outputs. Finally, program logic models show outcomes, the changes or benefits that are expected to occur. So, for example, an outcome might be the desired change in the target audience's attitudes, knowledge, social norms. It could be changes in policies, in systems, in structures, in people's skills and behaviors. Almost always, a logic model shows arrows like these, suggesting that inputs lead to activities, that activities lead to outputs, and that outputs lead to outcomes. Now, there's a certain logic to this sequence, but probably the most important arrow would be the one showing which activities lead to which outcomes. So let's take a look at a different, more detailed depiction of a logic model to see how this logic works. Here's another standard form for a logic model. This one is for Cope Care Connect. It shows campaign activities, such as the pledge activity, handing out fact sheets, and engaging people in a trivia quiz. It shows the outputs of these activities, the number of people engaged and/or the number of resources handed out. Outcomes the campaign is expected to produce are also shown. These would include greater skill and greater knowledge. And the logic model shows the overall goal of the campaign, that is, students engaging in resilience-enhancing behaviors. Notice how this logic model lets you show the exact outputs of specific activities. Typically, arrows are also drawn from outputs to expected outcomes. I've shown them here, though, as dotted lines, because if you think about it logically, as a logic model compels you to do, you can see that certain outputs don't actually lead to expected outcomes. For example, simply registering for a pledge doesn't do anything to build behavioral skills. So this arrow really shouldn't be here. Doing the pledge, on the other hand, would build skill and lead to the expected outcome. So this arrow should be here. The same might apply to handing out fact sheets. We all know that just because they were handed out, it doesn't mean that they were read. We can only hope that the fact sheets were read and led to the expected outcome of increased knowledge. Likewise, we would hope that doing the quiz and seeing answers would increase people's knowledge. In a logic model, it can be much more helpful to skip over the outputs and simply consider whether the activities will lead to the expected outcomes. Setting up a logic model like this forces you to consider whether specific activities will ultimately serve the goal. In this case, having more students engage in the desired behavior. If your goal is behavior change, but all of your activities are things like fact sheets and quizzes that lead to knowledge but not behavioral skills, then you won't achieve your goals. You need an activity that increases skills in order to reach the behavior change goal of more students engaging in the desired behavior. That's why it's really important to draw a logic model and to see if activities will logically lead to the expected outcomes. To conclude our look at logic models, let's just quickly review the terminology. Inputs are the existing resources like effort, time, equipment, or the demand on those resources. Activities are all the materials, messages, events, and interventions that will comprise the initiative. So they're your things like websites, posters, ads, workshops, social media posts, advocacy efforts, services, handouts, all of that kind of stuff. Outputs can be thought of as the materials, messages, events, interventions that are created for the initiative, and or the number of products created or disseminated, the number of people reached, the number of people using the materials, taking steps, and so on. So they're kind of the counts. Outcomes, on the other hand, are the measurable changes in people, changes in their attitudes, their values, their knowledge, their social norms, skills, behaviors, as well as changes in policies, environments, systems, and structures. These are what you expect to achieve when you design and implement the intervention. These all lead to the goal. So outputs are what you will monitor and track while the campaign or initiative is running. They are part of process evaluation. Outcomes are what you measure at the conclusion of the campaign or initiative. They're part of summative evaluation to see if you achieved your expected outcomes. And to measure the outputs and outcomes, you typically establish indicators. Indicators are what will be monitored or measured to determine what outputs occurred and what outcomes were achieved. They're the actual questions on a questionnaire. They're the behaviors observed in the field. They're the Google Analytics stats that are retrieved from reports. But we're going to talk more about these in the next lesson. For now, be sure that you really understand logic models from a big picture view and in terms of the specific constructs that comprise a logic model. So that ends this mini lecture. Please do get in touch with me if you have any questions. Even if I answer slowly, I always do answer. And if you can't reach me, you can try our excellent TA. Okay? Well, that's it, everybody. Bye for now.